as China-U.S. relations move towards a historic reset. Both leaders agreed that cooperation is the only correct choice for China and the U.S., and that a better future would only be achieved through win-win cooperation. And one of the most outstanding achievements is bilateral business cooperation and business deals, signing deals worth about a record $253 billion U.S. And later on Friday, both leaders will go to Vietnam to attend the APEC economic leaders meeting. Before we go to our panel here in Da Nang, let's take a look at this backgrounder.
U.S. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump officially welcomed to the Great Hall of the People. Chinese President Xi Jinping, fresh off the 19th Party Congress, is riding a wave of confidence in his leadership.
Nothing you can see is so beautiful. I just want to thank you for the very warm welcome, and I look forward to many years of success and friendship.
Trump told Xi the China-U.S. trade relationship is unfair and unsustainable. But the man who blamed Beijing on the campaign trail didn't do so face-to-face.
I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens?
Xi acknowledged the $347 billion trade imbalance between China and the United States, calling on Washington to address the problem by increasing bilateral trade.
We need to further expand trade and investment cooperation, strengthen macroeconomic policy cooperation, and proceed to healthy, stable, and dynamically balanced economic and trade relations.
China remains a major market for the 29 CEOs who accompanied the U.S. president to China. Thursday, they signed 15 agreements worth more than $250 billion in areas such as natural gas, auto parts, and aircraft. Both President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump now head on to a major regional economic conference in Vietnam, where both are expected to share their vision for economic cooperation in the Asia-Pacific.
And I'm joined here at the International Media Center by two guests to talk about China-U.S. relations and what is ahead for the APEC Economic Leaders Week. Monica Whaley, President of the National Center for APEC, coming from the United States. Welcome, Monica.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And great to welcome also Jing Ulrich, who is the Managing Director of J.P. Morgan. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is a big day. A big day for China and the United States. That's why I have these two wonderful ladies coming from both countries joining us. So, Jing, $250 billion U.S. dollars. That's the trade deal, the number for this time alone. Wow.
Well, this is certainly a headline grabbing. If you think about President Trump's visit to Beijing today, it is actually a historic visit because this is at the conclusion of China's 19th Party Congress. This is also the President's first trip to Asia after taking office. So it's highly significant. So just today, both U.S. and China inked $250 billion worth of deals, including many different areas. Of course, Boeing grabbed the headlines. They're going to sell 300 aircraft to China worth some $37 billion U.S. dollars, plus energy deals and other sectors as well. So this is quite encouraging. I think the visit that President Trump made to Beijing this week clearly is getting off to a pretty good start.
What about that? Your take, Monica, the nature of these deals?
Well, being from Seattle, Boeing is my hometown company, so I was delighted to hear
asking
about
the right person.
Delighted to hear about that. No, I think this is it's very exciting to have so many great deals being put together, and I think that was the focus of the trip, which was at least the part in Beijing, and I think it really makes a difference that the president has come for such a long trip throughout all of Asia. I know we're going to get to that soon, but it's really a very important and significant commitment to Asia from the United States.
We're going to talk about the latter half of this week, which is even more significant because this is going to be a multilateral platform that we're talking about. But still, let's stick to U.S. and China for the moment. But people are saying, what about the nature of these business deals? Is it really going to lay a foundation about a new era for China-U.S. relations? Monica, what do you think?
I think that the China-U.S. relationship has always been very multifaceted, and this has certainly always been one facet of it. I think these are interesting deals because a lot of them, like the one you mentioned from Boeing, results in a lot of jobs in the United States. And I know that that is something we're looking very closely at, is trying to improve the opportunities in the United States for manufacturers and to level playing fields in Asia-Pacific.
What about you, Jing?
I know it's very interesting. If you think about the U.S.-China relationship, it is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. The two countries have enjoyed 38 years of diplomatic relations. So during those 38 years, trade between China and the U.S. has grown by 211 times.
That's right.
This is an incredible number. So going forward, if you say the two countries are entering a new era in their bilateral relations, I may actually agree, because now we're under the second term of President Xi Jinping. Right. He's starting the second 5-year term. President Trump has been in office for about 10 months now. Clearly, there are issues to be resolved between China and the U.S. One of the issues is the trade deficit. Bilateral relations between China and the U.S. have really blossomed in the last 38 years. However, we know bilateral trade amounts to $500 billion U.S. dollars, but China enjoys a very big trade surplus amounting to $347 billion U.S. dollars. Clearly, the U.S. side is not completely satisfied with the big deficit it runs with China. So how do you resolve that going forward?
That's a big question mark. And also, President Trump, during his stay in Beijing, he's talking about, he's not blaming China for the trade problems, but rather the other issues that he is looking at that is contributing to the trade problems between China and the United States. So, Monica, that seems to be quite new in a way, different from his campaign slogans, but at the same time seem to lay a good foundation for the two leaders to move forward their further dialogues.
Well, I think also that coming from a businessman, which the president is a businessman, and I'm sure he does, like so many of us, admire the Chinese entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that is where there's a foundation of common understanding there, and I think that it does lay the foundation for a good friendship going forward. I think the president's visit, I think, is, as Jing said, very historic, and I think this is really important that we have a strong relationship between the U.S. and China. I couldn't agree more.
China is talking about reform and opening up. That was being said very clearly when President Xi Jinping, together with the other members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, facing for the very first time the international press. That's the first thing he said, reform and opening up. So what would that mean for your industry, for example, banking, Jing? And will, in the future, the nature of China-U.S. relationship, particularly trade, change and switch to some of the areas that you are working on?
China's economy is in rapid transition. I think President Xi Jinping is absolutely right to emphasize the importance of reform, restructuring, and also making China a much more sustainable in terms of economic growth path. In the past, China was pursuing the quantity of growth. Now, in the next phase of China's development, the country is going to pursue the quality of growth. So in terms of the next 5 years, and also in terms of U.S.-China relations, of course, in banking and financial services, we would like China to be more open to global financial services firms in terms of banking, insurance, asset management, brokerage, securities, trust, futures and options. That's one thing. On the other side, I think China is absolutely right to focus on the new economy. By new economy, I mean things like the internet, e-commerce, logistics, new energy, clean vehicles. So that's where China is focusing on. So if you think about President Xi Jinping's landmark announcement a few years ago about supply-side reform, he's now rejuvenating the traditional industries in steel, cement, and coal. In the meantime, he's emphasizing Made in China 2025. Right. So this is a twin goal of China, which is on the one side, restructuring and reform the traditional industries. On the other side, making China a much more modern, much more developed economy. Right. By 2049, he said China will be a fully developed nation,
That's
which is a very important goal China needs to
absolutely a
achieve.
grand goal too, if you look at China's past history. But Monica, you know, when you look at these things, this is also the focus of this year's APEC Economic Leaders Week here in Da Nang. But the thing is, development stages of these economies are very different. So what about organizing them together, you know, and also the U.S. side, what can be the contribution from your side?
Well, I think what's really important about APEC, they are looking at these issues, the digital economy and the services industries, services sectors. And what's interesting about APEC, it is a very unique and very diverse set of economies, largest and smallest and different levels of development. But what APEC has built into it is this capacity building element. And so there's, when APEC comes to a conclusion on something that they want to have a goal, they also build into that this capacity building element so that those who are not as far along on the development scale can learn or can get best practices, can do demonstration projects with the others who are more advanced in that particular area. And we've done a lot of sort of centers of excellence and best practice learnings, and I think that that's where APEC can really contribute. And the United States has actually done a lot of those with various APEC economies and does a lot of ongoing work in capacity building.
I've been frequenting the APEC economic meetings over the past few years, thanks to many of our friends here. But one of the things you would notice is that it seems that the strategy of the region is always changing. You earlier had the pivot, for example, coming from the United States, then later called rebalance, and then for a while seemed to be very confusing. And now you also have a very different administration and a different approach to the region and certainly to international trade. So people are saying you need to change fast in the Asia-Pacific region to the policies and also to the way people are dealing with one another. Monica, what do you think about that fact?
Well, I think there's a lot of economies across the world that are experiencing some of the things that we are about people's feelings about globalization and feeling like there's a group of people that have been left behind from that process. So I don't think it's just the United States that's facing that process, but I also think that the United States the new administration is very keen on focusing on things that, agreements that have not been kept or commitments that have not been lived up to within the various trading arrangements. And so I think having a fairer and more level playing field is really their focus. And I think that doesn't negate what they've always said about trade being a very positive and good thing and good for growth. They obviously very encouraging to exporting firms, and they do understand this, and they encourage it. That they want to tackle those things which have been barriers in trade, and I think that's where I think the new focus is. But I think New Zealand's also got a new focus with their new prime minister. There's European economies which also have a new voices out there that are weighing on sort of the policymakers' worlds.
Let's talk about China-U.S. for the moment still. Jing, many wonder whether President Trump, when he is coming for his speech, his first ever, I guess, on the APEC platform to give a speech, what is going to be his focus? Because earlier he had America First or withdraw from the TPP, but then he's coming this time to the multilateral platform. That should be encouraging. So people are going to listen very closely exactly what he's having in mind. What about from you, people like from the business community, the banking sector?
Well, I think, one big takeaway from today's discussions between President Xi Jinping and President Trump is that President Xi emphasized cooperation is the only way forward. He emphasized common prosperity, more inclusive growth. And actually, if you listen to the rhetoric from President Trump this week, he's also been much more, he's embracing basically the Asian cultures. He visited the Forbidden City on his first day in Beijing. So I think he struck a much more conciliatory tone. Even today, he didn't blame China for the massive surplus that China runs with the United States, right? So in terms of the tone, in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of the mutual understanding, actually, I think this trip has been exceeding people's expectations.
Interesting. Monica, what is your expectation? Because you're here talking to many of those coming from the American delegation. I'm sure they have something to expect.
Well, there's a very large U.S. business delegation here in Da Nang, which is a very strong showing of support. I know that based on the things that the President and the White House has put out in the last few weeks, the CEO Summit is going to be where he lays out his vision for the Indo-Pacific area, as they're calling it, and I think it blends both the economic and strategic and geopolitical elements of the two different oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and I think this is obviously of great interest to all of the APEC economies. So it will be exciting to hear what he has to say, and we're looking forward to finding out.
Because people are very interested in whether this administration has already come up with some kinds of set of policies and understanding toward the Asia-Pacific region. What is going to be 1 year already since President Trump was being announced as the President of the United States, he has in mind for this. But that should make us nervous, or actually should make us more excited because President Trump is here and he's going to talk about this on this multilateral platform.
Well, actually, I think there's a tremendous opportunity going forward. If you look at the world economy today, we're in much better shape than any time in the last 6 or 7 years.
That's very true.
Well, if you look at the global economy, we're in synchronized growth, right? China's economy so far this year has surpassed people's expectations. The U.S. economy, given President Trump's initiatives, including the tax reform, hopefully will grow even faster next year. And if you look around the world, Europe is growing. Japan is doing fairly well. The corporate sector globally is making record profits. Stock markets around the world are hitting new highs nearly every day.
This is the opportunity.
It is an opportunity, and we don't have an immediate economic crisis on our hands right now. So I would argue this is an opportune time for leaders from around the world, including the Asia-Pacific region, to undertake some really important structural reform, because we don't have to handle the next economic crisis around the corner. We can prepare ourselves better. I mean, there will be a recession. There will be another crisis coming down the road. We don't know when. So I think this is a great time to be undertaking some of the important structural reforms.
True. Our priority has been overtaken by urgencies over the past few years, if not a decade. This could be a time. But, Monica, it also depends on whether countries can work together, or whether they can work together in a real way. Of course, Chinese President Xi Jinping tomorrow is also going to be here in Da Nang, laying out his strategy after he did it in Davos earlier this year. This is going to be a second chance. So, Monica, from the American business community, what is the expectation?
Well, I think the expectation of President Xi's remarks?
Yeah,
I think we can't predict, obviously, what, I mean, we expect to hear some of the same themes, obviously, that he laid out in Davos and in Lima last year at the APEC CEO Summit. But I think the other thing that we see that we think APEC is going to do to focus on are the next generation of issues, the 21st century issues, internet, the digital economy, and how you can use those things to be more inclusive of women and get women engaged in the economy, to have a greater access for services. All of these things, I think APEC has some very practical initiatives on, and I think that is where the rubber meets the road in APEC, and opening up these areas and finding ways to advance together, because there is a lot of cooperation in APEC on those kinds of issues.
Well, you've got a big crowd of people who pro-globalization here, right? You've got a lot of people who is for regional cooperation. That's why they're here. But how can you go back home, persuade some of those constituencies that might not be really benefiting from what we had before? That is the big question. Will the leaders be able to figure that question out? I guess that will be crucial. Monica.
Well, I think that we've done a lot of thinking about that this week. Actually, there was a conference just a few days ago on the globalization issue and how exactly this question you have, how you bring more people along. And I think that is something that is more and more the business community is saying it's not only government policies that can help with that, but businesses can do more to do ongoing training within their businesses. They can do advanced education for their older employees on doing things that take a little bit of technical skill on the internet side or the digital side, and helping to transform their workforces into 21st century workforces.
Right.
It's certainly in businesses' interest to do that. There are also some things government can do, and I think they're thinking very carefully about how those two things could work together possibly, but it's obviously a strong need on the part of all business and government to get to the bottom of this question.
It is. We need to get to the bottom of this question. Jing, last word from you?
Well, I think, if you think about how important this week is, right? We had President Trump visiting Korea, Japan, and China, coming to Da Nang tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you think about the 21 economies that are gathered here in Da Nang, Vietnam, discussing the very important issues facing the global economy, facing the regional economy, as well as businesses. So I would say, by all accounts, this is one of the most important weeks so far this year in the Asia-Pacific region as well as in the world. And I think more multilateral discussions among leaders and business people will only bring us closer together.
Well, a lot to expect. And even after the APEC Leaders Summit, they are going to go for a further summit among the ASEAN countries and the East Asia Summit. A lot of things going on. But thank you so much, ladies, for being with us. We learned a lot. And Monica, Jing, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.